Hello, I'm James,
Hi, I'm Jimmy,
and welcome to A Job Done Well.
the podcast that helps you improve your performance and enjoyment at work.
Good afternoon, how are you doing?
I'm right, James. How are you?
I'm fabulous, thank you very much for asking. It's
You've
Friday.
you've got to think of another way of describing yourself.
Well, I do it every morning. I stand up and I look in the mirror and I say, "You are a winner." And I come to the conclusion, if I say it often enough, I might, there might be some truth. One of these days, you live in hope, can't you?
Keep convincing yourself you are fabulous. So what are we talking about today, James?
This week we are talking about something fascinating. We're going to talk about unintended consequences.
Okay. Well, why are we talking about unintended consequences?
Well, because you see them everywhere in all organisations, and unintended consequences invariably, not always, but invariably, are things that happen that you do not want them to happen. So, for example, in the news at the moment, we're all over the fact with Donald Trump and his tariffs. He's doing it to bring factories back into the US, if that's you believe what the man says. But he's got all sorts of unintended consequences running wild on him.
Well, also, we see them all the time in every organisation we have ever worked with, where things go wrong, stuff happens. Didn't we work out that everyone spends on average in service industry 1 week a month cleaning up crap that goes wrong? And those are almost always unintended consequences.
I don't know, mate. I've worked some places where the crap was pretty intentional, but another story.
That's a whole nother episode.
Yeah, a whole other episode.
And in terms of what the listener will get out of today, they will learn more about unintended consequences and some excellent examples of that and some ways to avoid them in the future.
So again, I told you it's going to be interesting.
It will be. Yeah. So what have you been up to since we last talked, James?
A major milestone in the Lawther family. My eldest daughter finished her degree. She did all of her exams this week, so that is all gone and there will be no more 21-year-old angst about exams, so I'm looking forward to it. That's a great step forward.
Sweet relief. She may never do another exam in the rest of her life. What a thought that is.
I don't think she's planning on it. How about you?
Not so I blame her. Well, I have been helping my other half, Vic, with a gardening project this week. She had the bright idea of building some raised flower beds.
All right.
What this entailed going to a place where you buy old railway sleepers.
Okay.
Unbelievable place. They collect them from all over the globe. They had them from Bolivia, from Poland, from the UK, all sorts.
So where is this place? Is this local?
It's just outside Nottingham. It's in Cotgrave.
So we have got a sort of a worldwide centre in.
We have. That it's something like www.railwaysleepers.com.
Well,
Can you believe it?
Something to look up.
Yeah, and but two things. First one was Vic, a yard of about 10,000 railway sleepers could find the 12 most expensive.
Well, what were they?
Tropical hardwood, apparently. But not only are they the most expensive, they are also the heaviest. So when it came to unloading 12 railway sleepers that weigh 120 kilos each, my back is still paying the price for that.
Wow. Yeah, you need a younger, fitter man to work for you, mate.
I had one, and the both of us struggled with it, trust me. So, unintended consequences then, James?
I have got a definition for you. Here you go.
Excellent.
So, an unintended consequence, or sometimes unanticipated consequence, or unforeseen consequence, more colloquially known as knock-on effects, are outcomes of purposeful action that are not intended or foreseen. So there you go. The term was popularized in the 20th century by the American sociologist Robert K. Merton. You're glad I told you all of that, aren't you?
I am, but I do like the fact knock-on effects. I can get. I can go with that.
Right. But what is quite interesting, I think, is there are actually three types of unintended consequences, and we'll talk them through. So you can have an unexpected drawback.
Right.
You can have a perverse result. Or you can have an unexpected benefit.
Some of the unintended consequences aren't always bad, are they?
No, not at all. So let's talk through each one of those then. So let's some historical examples to bring it to life a little bit. So an unintended drawback. So I'll give you one and you can come back with one. So my favourite, I think, is actually cane toads in Australia. So they introduced cane toads into Australia in about the 1940s or something like that. And the intention was they'd use it to control pests on sugarcane plantations. But they're not a native species, and they just became totally invasive. They spread throughout on the eastern coast of Australia like wildfire, and they incredibly poisonous. And because they're so poisonous, first of all, they themselves predate on native fauna, but also the sort of big Australian predators, things like crocodiles and monitor lizards, they will eat these things and then they become sick and die. And there's actually risk even to pets and humans, because if a pet takes one, it will kill it off. And humans who touch them are in risk of dying from poisoning as well. So there you go. There's my example of an unexpected drawback. Well, I'm not actually sure how good it was at looking after the pest that it was supposed to be reducing, but there you go.
Well, just to build on that, James, that is probably part of the driving force behind the strict border controls that they have on stuff coming into Australia because of the impact on the environment. And that is one of the best guilty pleasures on TV that you can find. Border Force. It's a program called Border Force, and it's like a fly on the wall documentary of the Australian customs stopping people bringing in all sorts of weird and wonderful foods and seeds and all sorts into their country.
Well,
unintended consequence. They did not expect to introduce cane toads and have a TV program.
Yeah, but then depending on how highbrow you are, you see, for you, that would be an unexpected benefit. But for me, that's another unexpected drawback.
One of the ones that I like best, though, is one that touches our lives every day, and that's the internet. Now, the internet has, without a doubt, over the last however many decades, has transformed our lives. It has done so much to bring information, communication, relationships, business, you name it, it has done it. But there are unintended consequences. I don't think, what's his name? Sir Tim Berners-Lee? Sir Tim Berners-Lee.
Yeah,
okay. Sir Tim Berners-Lee. I don't think he intended, when he set up the internet, quite to have some of the impacts that he's had. So a good couple of examples were the fact that privacy now and data is such a driving force behind so much of society, and probably more prevalent is the impact that social media and the internet has on people's mental health, the inability to switch off, the pervasiveness that it has, the hate, the echo chambers. All of those things were not intended consequences of the internet.
But have you got any sort of work examples?
Yeah, so I'll give you a good example that I faced once at work. It was looking at outsourcing within an operation, within a service environment. And what we did is what a lot of people are guilty of doing, which is found the simplest tasks and moved them out to India.
Yeah.
And that supposedly had two benefits. One, it got the simplest task done in an environment that was very cheap, and they had that capability to do that. And two, it meant that our UK operation could focus on the more difficult, more complex issues. What we hadn't realised was that in the UK operation, they used those simple tasks as an opportunity to have a bit of a breather from having people shout at them and having to deal with horrible problems all the time. So when you took out those breathers out of their day, it made their day a real tough grind. We thought it was great because they're focusing on complexity. They thought it was awful because they never got a break from people shouting at them. And funny enough, after that, attrition went up and absence went up. So that was not a consequence that we were expecting.
There you go. Good example. All right, so move on to the next one. So the one I really like is perverse effects. This is called It's All Gone Tits Up, right?
Now, is that the disaster freak in you?
I'm as happy as Larry when it's all gone belly up. We're trying to fix it, but that's another story. So I'll give you two examples of perverse effects.
Okay.
So the one I really like is the Cobra effect. So in the Indian Raj, so when England ruled the waves, in one of the Indian cities, I can't remember which one, but they had a real problem with cobras.
Yeah.
And no self-respecting bureaucrat likes cobras not running around the city, slithering around the city. Yeah.
I don't think anyone likes cobras slithering around the city, do they?
But the bureaucrats had the power to solve this. So what they did was they instigated the rewards. And for every snake's head that you brought, to demonstrate that you killed the snake, you got a payment. But so this was great because obviously the population of cobra dropped massively. But interestingly, there were some snake hunters who were just infinitely better than the others.
Yeah.
And they kept on bringing in snakeheads. Everybody else had stopped finding them, but these guys were just red hot at finding snakeheads. And after a while, the British bureaucrats got a bit suspicious of this, and they realised that what they were doing was they were farming snakes. So instead of hunting them down, nice little revenue earner, they were farming the snakes, and they were every now and again harvest the snake, take the head off, and get paid for it. So it was absolute winner. Of course, the bureaucrats got wise to this, so then they stopped these payments. And then, of course, they let all the snakes go, which they'd been farming, and they went exactly back to where they were, if not worse. So there you go. There's one example of a perverse effect. Now, a more recent one, which I think is also very good. So what is the name of that book that's just been published about Facebook?
Careless People.
Right, Careless People. So it's a story about this woman worked at Facebook, and she just pointed out what a bunch of charlatans they were and all the things that they were doing, which really people ought not be doing in business. And so obviously Facebook didn't like that very much, so they tried to ban it from being published. But the very act of taking people to court and trying to ban it from being published just created loads and loads and loads of publicity. So, of course, when the publishers did eventually publish it, it went straight to number one. Whereas if Facebook had kept their mouth shut, maybe it would have fizzled out like mine has. So there you go. There's a perfect example of a perverse effect. I should have written something nasty about Facebook in my book, actually, shouldn't I?
You should have done.
Yeah, I'll have to think about that.
Well, it's like we put out these short videos from our podcast, and our most popular one so far was you making a joke about JD Vance, wasn't it?
Well, yeah. And then the second one is the one which I had to beep out because you'd have got us sued.
Yeah, we're talking about
beep.
I won't do it just because it upsets you.
Oh, yeah, all right.
So one of the things that Facebook allegedly had done was they had picked up when young girls took a selfie of themselves and deleted it quickly, and then put another one on, which meant that they weren't happy with some aspect of how they'd shown out in the photo. And then it was serving them things like diet pills and stuff like that. It's just outrageous.
Well, you can understand why Facebook wanted to ban the book. But anyway, so there you go, perverse effects.
You can also understand why loads of people went and
bought it. Yeah.
So if they really don't want me to read this book, bloody hell, I'm going to go and read it.
That's it. Yeah.
As well as recording this podcast, we help individuals, teams, and entire organisations achieve outstanding results.
If you'd like to find out more about how we can help you, please get in touch. Email either jimmy@ajobdonewell.com or james@ajobdonewell.com. So have you got an example at work?
Yeah, good example of a perverse effect. I worked with one company who were facing a massive backlog of work, and they rightly thought we'll use technology to solve this. But unfortunately, what they did is they built the system so complicated, so complex to deal with absolutely every eventuality that it wrapped itself in knots and actually couldn't work out any of the claims.
No, so it didn't pay anything at all.
It couldn't pay anything really. So that's a good example of you're trying to do one thing, it does the complete opposite. You want it to pay stuff and it pays no one.
What a winner. All right.
Yeah.
Too clever for our own good sometimes. So not always bad though. Can you give me an example of a positive unintended consequence?
Back to a different outsourcing story. I was running a UK team and we set up in India. But what we did is we asked the team in India to work overnight for us, our time. So in the UK, they'd do half a case. Then they'd send it over to India. India would work overnight for us and they would finish the case. And then when we came back in the morning, it was there already for us. So It worked really efficiently and that worked well. What we hadn't realised was that in asking the Indian teams to do those hours, actually they were great hours for them. Most of the outsourcing business where they're working for the UK, they mirror the UK hours. Well, that means they're working really unsociable hours in India. Ours, because they weren't mirroring the UK hours, were working really great hours. They loved it. So we had no attrition off our campaign. Everyone else had massive attrition. We had none. And because we had no attrition, they got really skilled. They did a great job for us. I'd love to tell you that that's why we did it, but that was definitely an unintended consequence, and it was really positive.
Yeah. You've had one positive and one negative on the outsourcing. You're net neutral.
Exactly. Exactly. So, but you will have, no doubt, a good story for us.
I've got two for you.
Go
One
on then.
is Perry Spencer. Have you ever heard about Perry Spencer?
No?
So Perry Spencer apparently worked for a company called Raytheon, and they made, I think they're called magnetrons for radars. And I don't know when this was, the 1940s or something like that, but they're working away on these magnetrons. And he discovered that his chocolate bar, which he got in his pocket, had melted. And that led to the development of the microwave oven.
Oh, wow.
There you go.
I have to confess, James, I do love a microwave oven.
Well,
Do
there you
even
go.
own-
And then there is, of course, the other point, which is, what is positive and what is not positive. So here's one. I mean, you tell me, is this positive or not? Elon Musk, fascist salute, Tesla sales. Now, that is definitely an unintended consequence, but whether it was a positive one or a negative one, I suppose depends on where you're sitting.
Well, if you're Elon Musk or an investor in Tesla, I think you would say that was definitely a negative one. If you are the large numbers of Elon haters, you'd say that was definitely positive.
So there you go. We've discussed unintended consequences, but why is that so prevalent a problem in business, do you think?
Well, I think that there are probably a few reasons that we can talk through. And I think one of the key things is it's just the psychology of people at work, psychology of managers, how we think about things.
Yeah.
So I think we should go through. I think there are also issues with how we target people, and probably the other way of thinking about it is a lack of understanding of how our businesses, how the systems within our business, and by systems I don't mean the technology, I mean the whole ecosystem of our business, how that actually works.
Yeah, okay. So let's psychology then.
Did you know, James, my dad was a reasonably eminent psychologist?
Oh, was he?
Yeah.
No,
I spent years not actually being able to spell the word psychology.
Well, let me just give you one example, right? So you can talk about bias, you could talk about bounded rationality. I won't, because I'm not entirely sure what it means. But groupthink is an example of a psychological thing. So one of the stories, which I think demonstrates groupthink quite nicely, is at Pearl Harbor. So before Pearl Harbor happened, apparently all the sort of Navy guys in Pearl Harbor, the elite there, had been warned about this, right? So they'd been warned, I don't know, the main US government had heard from spies that there was a plan afoot. So they'd been warned about that. They'd seen spotter planes. I think somebody also saw some ships coming over. But the guys at Pearl Harbor, between them, just convinced themselves that there was no way on God's earth that the Japanese could attack. Got into the whole groupthink thing. And because of the groupthink thing, well, the rest is history. So there you go. There's an example of psychology.
And you do see groupthink in a lot of organisations where people build almost a cult-like belief in what the organisation's doing or the path that we're taking is right, and they can't move themselves away from that groupthink.
Yeah. Another one, here you go, loss aversion. So you see this quite a lot as well, but people don't want to, they don't want to make a loss. But, it's been talked about loads of times, but the classic example of that is Kodak.
Yeah.
A business that went bust because they were too worried about what they had rather than what they could have. So there you go. There's a couple of psychology ones for you.
And I've got another one for you, James. Optimism bias. Optimism bias.
Oh, go on then, yeah.
In a lot of organisations, we get caught by optimism bias. So it'll all be all right. It'll all work out. You get into a big project where you start to invest in a system. It's not quite working. The project's not quite going the way you want, but we can't step away from it because we're always optimistic. It'll be all right. It'll all work out.
Yeah.
Lots of managers in the UK do suffer from optimism bias.
Yeah. So there's also, I suppose, just the way we think as managers.
Yeah, and often it's just the way we structure our organisations. Whether it's like budget cycles, annual performance reviews, even 5-year terms for government, stuff like that. They all force thinking within a certain time scale. And the problem with that is you don't necessarily think through the consequences of what's going to happen in the longer term. I've got to hit this year's number. How am I going to hit this year's number? Cut out a load of people. Well, that's okay, but how do I deal with the volumes I've got next year? The Labour Party is going to have to do this as they come towards the next election. How do I make it look like I've achieved loads when we're talking about fixing things like the NHS over a 10, 15-year period, but they've got a 5-year term. So you're naturally driven to stuff that's going to be solved within those timescales.
Yeah. Yeah, and there is also, so you've got to hit a short-term timescale, but actually get rewarded for making quick decisions. There's almost a
Yeah.
cultural thing there.
Yeah, we will always talk about being decisive as being positive. We won't necessarily talk about being reflective as being equally positive.
No,
I also,
absolutely.
I
Yeah.
also think through, and I've definitely been guilty of this, is some of the consequences that we've discussed, you have to really think quite deeply and thoroughly to work out that they were ever going to happen. And I think it's much easier just to not think things through as fully and just get on and move. And I know I'm one. We talk a lot about progress, not perfection, which is a good mantra, but at least know the progress you're making is in the right direction.
Yeah, there's a term for that, mate. Consequences not
What's
being
that?
offered. Bounded rationality. You
Ooh,
don't know what you don't know.
there
There
you
you
go.
go. Wasn't your dad a psychologist? You should have known that, mate. You should have known that.
As I told you, James, I struggled to spell the word psychology, let alone understand what it was all about.
All right. So there you go. There's that. Then you go into the whole thing about targets. I think we've probably done targets to death.
I think we covered targets in our recent episode on myths and way back on our episode on what gets measured gets done. So if people want to have a listen to them, they can find out all of your rants on targets are available
Yeah,
wherever
absolutely.
you
They
get
are.
your
Yeah.
podcasts.
I'll leave you one thought. I've probably said this before, but you hit the target and miss the point. So other than targets, what else
Yeah.
would you say is a reason? What else did we say?
Well, also there is the understanding of the system that you're working within. By system, we don't mean technology. We mean the whole system, whether that's technology processes, where you manage people, the environment you're working in, the whole 9 yards. People don't really understand how their systems work, do they?
No, and you've got a whole load of interconnecting components and independencies. And well, let me give you a very simple example. It's a little bit like the cane toads in a way, but there was a
Yeah.
bit of a scandal a while back. So Berwick on Tweed, which is on the English-Scottish border, for those of you who don't know, they had a lot of swans, a flock of swans living on the Tweed. And they woke up one day, and half these swans are dead, and the rest are sort of scavenging through the town looking for food. And what the hell has gone on? And what happened? There'd been a European directive about reducing effluents, and one of the local plants, I think it was a barley malting plant, used to discharge its effluent into the Tweed, and it'd been told to stop pollution in the North Sea. But that was actually the main source of food for these swans, hence a load of starving swans. But these sorts of
All right.
connections people don't think about. So, yeah, things are
No.
much more complex than we think they are. So there's one. If you've enjoyed our podcast, please share it with someone you think would benefit from it.
Also, like and follow us wherever you get your podcast or on LinkedIn, TikTok, or YouTube. And 5-star reviews are always welcome.
And equally, if you've got any feedback on how we can improve the podcast, subjects you'd like us to cover, or questions we can help you with, please do get in touch. Email jimmy@ajobdonewell.com or james@ajobdonewell.com.
Another good one would be the story about Uber. So this is a good example of where there is a non-linear relationship between things within your system. So as Uber built their network, nothing was happening. They kept building and building and building. And then all of a sudden it takes off. And when it takes off in an exponential way, not just in a straight line way. So it's understanding those kind of dynamics of how your system works and how it responds to things that people don't think through or understand.
Yeah, so it's a very simple example of that. There was a story about it was a experiment they did. It was about selling jam, and they set up a jam stall on a market, and they sold one type of jam. And they found out, if I sell this one type, I get this much sales. So then they tried selling 2 types of jam, and they got double the sales. And they went 3 types of jam. I think, here we go,
Yeah.
4 types of jam. But what was really interesting was they ended up, selling 14 types of jam. And by the time they got to that point, they hardly sold any jam at all because people couldn't make their bloody minds up about which type of jam they want. So more is definitely not always more.
Well, we had a similar experience when we were looking at cars a few years ago. And for my sins, and this was pre his Nazi salute days,
Yeah.
was getting a Tesla. And they had very limited number of choices. It was ever so simple, 3 or 4 choices, that's it. At the same point, Vic was getting a Range Rover, and you could have so many permutations she completely got lost in it. And it really was quite a pain in the arse to try and work out which particular type that you got. And you always felt that you missed out on something. You got something wrong. Completely unnecessary to give people too much choice, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But just there you go. Relationships are not linear. And then you just get all sorts of loops. I mean, I'll just go one because we've both seen it. But in call centres, you can get into a callback spiral or a death loop. Or company we work for, they called it something very macho. What do they call it? Turbo, that was it.
Turbo, yes.
Yeah. But, if you don't answer the phone...
The trouble is, James, turbo sounds quite positive, doesn't it? I want turbo.
Yeah.
No, you don't want
really
turbo.
You do.
What turbo is, you mess something up, you've got people calling you, you're not answering it, and then they keep calling you, build up this whole kind of, it's almost like a tidal wave, isn't it?
Horrible experience. So there you go. The whole host of system dynamics which can cause unintended consequences. So here you have it. Question is, very easy to point at these things, but what can you do to stop them from happening?
So I think there's a few things that you can do to help. One is about talking more and thinking more about the decisions you're making. So, we talk quite a bit about diversity and the importance of diversity, but getting different opinions on something can help you see some of those potential risks, some of those potential consequences.
I think you're right. So diverse opinions, that's really important. It's very easy particularly if you happen to be a middle-aged white bloke, but to think you know all the answers. But it never ceases to amaze me when I'm talking to my teenage daughters about the things they know about different apps and different things on the internet that I haven't got the first idea about. So diversity brings a whole different perspective to things.
I think another good point around when you're in that planning phase is role-playing scenarios. I always absolutely hated scenario planning because I always thought it was such a theoretical exercise. And actually, I worked for an organization where you had to be prepared to deal with all sorts of different scenarios, and they wouldn't happen very often. But when they happened, they had quite devastating consequences. So you had to get it right. So we invested quite a lot of time in scenario planning. And what that meant is that we thought through what those consequences could be, and also we would be ready for them. And we had decided on how we were going to respond when things were calmer and you had a chance to think. When you do it in the heat of battle, you can't think.
Next one, I think, is just reduce your blind side. And, it's stuff you'll all have heard of, but call out the assumptions that you've got. So I believe this for these reasons. Well, and people can challenge your assumptions and you'll learn something different.
Yeah, and when I was working in one team, we did a whole thing about our risk profile as a team. And we found that we had real optimism bias in a lot of us, but one person in the team didn't have optimism bias. They were completely opposite. So we realized that actually we probably should listen to them a little bit more rather than viewing them as the outlier, as the naysayer.
Yeah. I spent my life doing this, but Post-it notes and lines and arrows and drawing out the system and just thinking, well, what am I dealing with? How do I think this possibly could be working? So just thinking about,
Well, and one of the things that we always talk about, James, is thinking through the system holistically rather than just doing it in the parts. So do I understand how the things that I do in my department impact the other departments and impact other parts of the organization? Often we just think about a little silo and optimize within our little silo, and that almost always has unintended consequences for someone else.
And the problem with all these suggestions on things you can do is they're all very worthy, right? You can see people's eyeballs roll into the back of their heads, but there is value in doing them. I'm reminded of that fabulous, here you go. Fail to plan, plan to fail. Do you like that? It's good, isn't it?
You're full of cliches today, James. That's impressive. Yeah. But what's the other one that's similar?
Go on. Poor planning gives piss poor performance, the 5P model.
That's the one. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. I hate planning. But so do as I say, don't do as I do.
No, but in fairness, when we have experienced that, we have absolutely seen the value. So you do have to invest the time.
Yeah.
It's going into the things that naturally, whether it's optimism bias, whether it's the desire for action, whether it's the desire to be decisive, all of these things, it is about spending some time thinking through those consequences. Yeah. Otherwise, because I think if you could, back to your point about there are three types of unintended consequences, 1 out of 3 was positive. I bet if you worked out how many times you suffered the 2 negative ones, they far outweigh the benefits of the 1 positive one, which is, let's be right, is a case of luck, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Other than that, though, there are, I think, some more practical things you can do rather than having a talking shop.
Yeah.
The one I just run some pilots, test small. If you're going to make a change, test it first of all, see what's going to happen. Yeah. We are a little bit in love with going gung-ho because you've got courage in your convictions, but actually running a test is a really valuable thing to do.
On that, James, that is particularly important in today's world because we're often using things like AI to do stuff we don't fully understand. And often the AI has to learn about how you're doing things. We did a really great test in one organization I worked with, but it took us a while to fine-tune the systems to be able to work out the answers that we needed. The stuff it was doing at the start, absolute nonsense. It was awful, but it's just because it hadn't learned. So you have to run these tests and give time to learn. And then you run really fast when you've actually then done that testing.
Yeah. And then the other one is if you're going to change something for, I would say this as an analyst, but monitor performance. So look and see, well, what do I think is going to happen? What are these numbers? And check to see what's going on. Very straightforward. But if you're going to get hit by an unintended consequence, make sure you catch it quick.
Well, one of the disciplines that we used to do in one of the operations I worked in is we used to have a morning huddle and an end of day huddle. And this is when we were going through a lot of change. And what we'd do is we'd talk about the change that we had going on in the morning. We would implement it and see how the day went. And at the end of the day, we would review what had happened and what were the consequences were. That meant that we got on the unintended consequences really quickly so we could change it for the next day. But you have to, again, invest the time to do those sorts of things.
And then my last one, if you must use targets, go at something at a high level. Don't go at a sales rate, go at an overall profitability or something like that. And try and reduce the incentives because incentives, people will cheat to hit incentives.
Well, when I've looked at overall customer satisfaction for an organisation and everyone was targeted on the overall customer satisfaction, all of a sudden everyone in the organisation became interested in that, and that was linked to the organisation's overall purpose. So done in the right way, you can mobilise a lot of action and interest in the right direction for your company.
Yeah. So there you go. Things you could do to stop unintended consequences. There you go. It's more interesting than you thought it was going to be, wasn't it?
James, you're always more interested than I think.
You didn't have high hopes. Yeah, all right.
But in fairness, hopefully we've lived up to what we said, that we've educated people on the different types of unintended consequence. We've talked about how they happen, why they happen, and what you can do about it.
Yeah, and you've learned never pick up a cane toad if you see one in Australia.
And we've got cane toads to thank for Border Force.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Who knew? All right. Thank you very much. I shall speak to you next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers now.